This is the practice test for Algebra A, Test 5 of Quarter 1. And so the first problem that you're going to end up seeing is a problem that involves absolute value. And so notice that we have the absolute value bars just around the 5 and the x. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is isolate that. So I'm going to end up adding 2 to both sides. So you always isolate that absolute value. And so now we've got it isolated. 5x inside the absolute value bars equals 15. So from this point, now I can set up my two problems, because the two numbers that make 15 are going to either be 15 itself or negative 15. Those are the two numbers that equal 15 when we go ahead and take their absolute values. So what we want to do is figure out what values of x make it either 15 or negative 15. So what we do from this point is just divide by 5 to undo that multiplication, and we find out that the two values are either negative 3 is one of the values of x, the other value of x is positive 3. So negative 3 and 3, those are the two solutions. So here it's different in that the 1 that's being added to the 3x is inside the absolute value bars. So now, since we have this already isolated, we can go ahead and set that expression equal to 13 and negative 13. So from this point, we're going to go ahead and subtract that 1 from all sides. And when I do that, I'm left with a negative 14 equals 3x, which also equals 12. So from this point, I'll divide by the 3, and I'll come up with my two solutions. So negative 14 thirds is one solution for x. That would make the negative 13 when I plug it in for x. And when I go ahead and do this subdivision, I end up with 4. So if I plugged in 4 for x, multiplied by 3, added 1, I get positive 13. So those are my two solutions, negative 14 thirds and 4. And if you wrote that out in the mixed number form, 3 going into 14, we would have 4 times with 2 left over, negative 4 and 2 thirds and 4. Those would be the same answers there. So either one, or even negative 4.6 repeating. Moving on to our next one, it's an inequality, so we're just going to solve it by doing opposite operations since the expression's already simplified there. So 3x is greater than or equal to, then we have negative 9. And so from this point, we're going to go ahead and divide by 3, and we'll come up with our two answers. Notice I'm dividing by a positive, not a negative, so I do not switch that inequality sign. So that is my answer. Next one is testing you on that division of a negative, so let's take a look at it. So first step is to subtract the 4 from all sides. So once I've done that, I've got 2x, negative 2x, is greater than negative 6. So I divide by negative 2, and when I do that, now that inequality sign is going to switch directions. Whenever you divide or multiply by a negative, the negatives, the signs of each of the terms switches. So that means that the next term, the other term on the opposite side, would be bigger or smaller depending on which way the inequality sign's facing. So this is my answer here. And let's see here, this is a positive 6 here, so I made a mistake. 10 minus 4 makes positive 6. Divide negative 2 in there, I get negative 3. So x is less than negative 3. Here I've got variables on both sides of the inequality sign. So I'm going to go ahead and add that 4 to both sides. And so when I do that, I'm left with 3x is less than 4x plus 2. So from this point, I need to subtract that 4x from both sides. And when I do this, notice that I'm getting a negative x is less than 2. So when I solve, I'm going to want to divide by a negative 1. And when I do that, that's going to switch that inequality sign again. So now x is greater than negative 2. Now if you'd solved it the other way, you would have had the x on the right side, the negative 2 on the left, and then you would not have had to switch the inequality sign because you divided by a positive. But notice that it means the same thing. See, if I read from left to right, x is greater than negative 2, or negative 2 is less than x, or x is greater than negative 2. So either of these answers would be fine. Here we have to collect some like terms. Notice the c's are on the same side of the inequality sign. So that means I'm going to add them together since they are the same sign. Over here, the 21 and the negative 14 are opposite signs, so I subtract. Gives me positive 7. And that bring down the plus 2c. And so from this point, now I've got it down to the stage just like I had that last problem where I'm going to do opposite operations. So here I'm just going to subtract the 2c from both sides. that leaves me with this. Leaves me with a c plus 8 is greater than or equal to 7. So from that point, all I have to do is subtract that 8 from both sides. And then that gives me my answer. So now c is greater than or equal to -1. Again, if you had the other answer, -1 is less than or equal to c, it means the same thing. See, c is greater than or equal to -1. It's open towards the c. So it means exactly the same thing. Well, let's take a look at the next 3 problems. And here they are. Here we have to use the distributive property. And so I'm going to distribute that 4 over that subtraction. So I'm left with 4c minus 8. And then over here, I've got a greater than or equal to sign. And distribute this, I end up with 8c plus 8. And so from this point, now it becomes a problem just like we had dealt with before. And so all I'm going to do is add that 8 to all sides. And so notice I still have a 4c is now less than or equal to 8c, but it's plus 16. So from that point, I need to subtract the 8c from both sides. And so that leaves me with a -4c is less than or equal to 16. And so from this point, I can go ahead and divide by that -4, and that will switch that inequality sign once more. So c is going to be greater than or equal to -4. Well, another one like this where we got to collect some like terms. Notice it's a -5x, a positive 2x. I subtract, and I got more negatives than positives. So that makes a -3x. I just bring down that 3, and on this side, I distribute the negative. Notice you could put a -1 here. So I'm bringing that -2 down and distributing the negative makes a -1 plus x. So I go ahead and collect the terms on the right-hand side. They're the same sign, so I end up adding those two numbers. So I have -3 plus x, and then the 3 minus 3x, and bring down that greater than symbol. So from this point, I'm going to go ahead and subtract that x from all sides. So now I have 3 minus 4x. Notice the same sign here, so I ended up adding. So I add when they're the same sign. And then I bring down that inequality sign and the -3. So now I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 3 from all sides, and I end up with a -4x is greater than -6. Same sign again, so I added. And so all I have to do now is divide by -4. So again, that's going to switch the inequality sign. X is less than, and then 6/4. So I can go ahead and take out a common factor of 2. So that makes 3/2. If you had x is less than 1 1/2, that's the same answer. 1.5 would work as well. Well, Ace Painting charges $250 plus. So Ace will say $250 plus, and then $16 per hour. Now, when you see the word per, that's where your variable goes, but we don't know that for certain until we see what the question is. How many hours? We don't know. See, there's your variable, h. And so let's set it up as $250 plus 16h. $16 times the number of hours. Now, they're asking, when will they charge the same? Same means equals. And so the next is Ed, and Ed's painting charges $210 and $18 each hour. So they want to know when they're going to charge the same. So right now, Ed is cheaper in the beginning because he charges less per hour. But eventually, Ace is going to be charge less because they charge less per hour. So let's go ahead and solve this by doing some opposite operations. So subtract the 210. That gives me 40, not 240. So 40 plus 16h equals 18h. So then I just need to subtract that 18 from both sides, or 16 from both sides. And that leaves me with 40 equals 2h. So I'm going to divide by the 2, and you'll see what we get. So 20 hours is when it will be when they charge the same. Well, that's just part of it. See, that's just part A. Now we got to do part B. They ask, how much will they charge? Well, what they'll charge is what we get when we substitute 20 back in for h. It doesn't matter which h you put it into. You're going to get the same answer. So just pick the easier one. So I guess I'll go ahead and pick the 250 plus 16 times by 20. So I gotta do 16 times by 2, that makes 32, and add the zeros, 320 plus 250. So I add those numbers together, 0, 7, and a 5. So $570 is what they'll end up charging. Well, those are the problems that you'll see on this week's test. So that was the practice test. Good luck.